How's everybody doing?
We're back.
Everyone, we're actually live streaming and recording. We're just waiting for the rest of the committee to sign on.
Yeah, we just finished up the real estate committee.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, and we're recording and live streaming whenever you're ready.
All right, great. Let's call the meeting to order. And Councilman Shahid, you're my deacon, so
You're just going to try to milk me as much as you can between now and January the 8th, aren't you?
that's right, man. All the way through the goal line, man.
All the way to the goal line.
All right, if you'd be kind enough to bring a few words, please.
Well, thank you. I mentioned this at our real estate meeting, so if I'm redundant, I apologize. But we celebrate and commemorate November the 11th as Veterans Day, a date to set aside to recognize the men and women who have served our country valiantly, who are our defenders for faith, our defenders for freedom, our defenders for democracy. We should never let this day pass us by without thanking our veterans, remembering them for the service they have afforded us, and that we all wish them Godspeed. In God's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Approval of the minutes for October 23rd, 23. What's the pleasure?
So move.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any questions on those minutes? Hearing none. All in favor, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item C1, request abandonment of a portion of 6th Avenue and Donovan Street. Who's gonna handle that?
I will, Councilman Waring.
All
This
right,
is
Ms.
Julia.
Copeland, you're up.
All right, you see this aerial I just pulled up?
I do.
Okay, so this is actually just a request for council or committee and council to set a public hearing on this particular issue.
Okay.
This is in Wagner Terrace. The Citadel currently owns most, if not all of these properties, except I think one here. And they're asking, for some reason in history, this has already been, a portion of it has been abandoned. So this is just the remaining half of 6th Avenue. Not really sure that happened. I can't find any documentation in the ROD. However, the Citadel has asked that we abandon this piece of paper right-of-way remaining in order for them to use it as an additional entrance into the back of the campus. And I think there's an additional plan here to eventually build additional student and veteran housing for their student population. So this will actually be presented or discussed at the Wagner Terrace HOA on the 20th. Councilman Gregory asked that the neighbors be notified of this and be given an opportunity to speak. So if this gets approval, we'll probably put it on an agenda for a public hearing in December.
What's the play, Councilman Shea?
Is Mark Redenberg still on our
I believe he
I see.
is.
Well, let us discuss this. I actually got to jot off for about 2 minutes and I'll be right back.
Okay.
he wants us to wait?
I'm not really sure.
I was going to ask Mark. Mark, this is the area in which the cadets would hop over the fence and go AWOL, right? That's what I remember about this property.
It's back in that area someplace. Actually, I think that I think where this is next to the house where our former commandant lives. I don't know if y'all know Gino Peluso, Captain Peluso. He was the most immediate past commandant. I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of cadets that are walking past his house and trying to jump a fence.
Only if they wanted to get caught.
So,
but I remember a lot of my contemporaries. I would drive my car over there by Donovan Street, and they would, at a particular hour, I know that I would pick them up as they were hopping over the fence, and we'd go down to Big John's.
oh yes.
That is hilarious.
Not that Mark would ever do that as a cadet, I can assure you, but
I think the statutes run on those things.
yeah, you can't do any more chores, Mark. I think you're okay.
Thank goodness there were no cell phones in our day.
All right, listen, amen. Because If we gonna keep on waiting, I'm home. I may have to make myself a cocktail. We finished the whole agenda, Mr. Chairman. We're done.
Oh, move for Germany. All right. Any more on that issue anyway? Any more
For
discussion?
approval.
We have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Bond. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Old business acceptance and dedication of rights of way. Who's gonna have that? Brian or Mr. Alltop?
Yeah, I'll do it. Tom's not on. So this is to accept a dedication of right of way for 50 feet of right of way on Blind Light Street over in Cane Hoy, in that first light. I think it's phase 4 over there.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Probably moved and seconded. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Environmental services update, Mr. Alltop.
Yeah, so environmental services going well. No issues to report. Garbage, trash, street sweeping, everything is running on time. The app's still performing well, and we're getting new users on that every day. So it's going well.
Well, let me tell you, that's an excellent report. Anytime everything's going well, thank you for what you do. H1 Stormwater Management, Mr. Fountain. Church Creek Flood Storage Project. Mr. Fountain.
He's muted.
I think we need pretty much Mr. Fountain to finish the rest of this meeting.
Maybe he went home and had a cocktail.
Oh, well, let me try to give him a quick call.
I wonder where Kevin Sheely had that photograph behind his head. Looks like he's at the Easter shop somewhere.
Yeah, where it was fun.
It was a grocery store.
Nothing exciting there, Kevin. I mean, come on.
And Mr. Chairman, just while we're waiting for Matt to start, we do have a very small quorum of 3, so
Right.
everyone needs to stay
Need to
on. for
stay.
this meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, keeping us in line. Hey, Mr. Fountain, he's there.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Sorry, I thought you were still waiting on the earlier items on the agenda.
No, that's fine. We're at H1 Church Creek's flood storage project.
Sure, happy to do it. So Church Creek Flood Storage Project, this is recommending approval of a construction contract with Low Country Site Work. It's the amount of $2,275,006. This is the construction contract for the Bridgepoint and Wolk Drive nature-based stormwater projects. Obviously, this approval sets up the project budget, which authorizes staff to award and or amend contracts for amounts less than $100,000 if there are existing funds within the approved budget. Project funding is set at $4,126,229, which includes drainage fund, small project allocation funding, and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grants, as shown on the agenda.
Okay.
Move to-
I think Councilman Bowden moved for approval, if I heard
Second.
correctly. Probably moved and seconded. Any more discussion on this? Is this going to be taking that former town home area and putting a lake feature, a pond feature, drainage feature, Mr. Fountain?
Yep, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. This
Okay.
is at Bridgepoint. This is an ecological park, and then at Wolk Drive, some stormwater storage and landscaping work.
Thank you, sir. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Spring
If-
Fishburne, Mr. Fountain.
Councilman Bowden has his hand up, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Chairman.
sorry, Councilman Bowden.
If I could just ask a couple questions while we're on that. When, Matt, when do you think they might be able to start about, are they going to do Wolk Drive first or Bridgepoint first, and then about when can we expect it to be completed?
So once we have the contract award, we'll have a little more information from pre-construction meetings with the contractor on what their intent is for early scheduling. At this point in the season, with an award, say mid to late November, they'll probably have bonds and process in hand by early December with the potential notice to proceed. I wouldn't really expect to see significant groundbreaking until January, but there may be some early site prep in December. They might come out and do tree protection, erosion, sediment control protection, that type of work. It's a relatively short run contract. We're looking to have everything generally complete by next fall. So it's not a long duration contract. So we should see pretty quick earthwork at both sites and movement. But we'll have more information once we get the contract into those pre-construction of what the contractor's intent is within the approved plans, and we'll be able to give you more updates, and as well as the surrounding neighbors on when to see construction traffic.
Okay. And then, I guess after the stormwater portion of this is done, is that when the park portion will take over?
So the stormwater side is basically laying the groundwork and foundation areas for the park work. And we are right now working with parks and our consultant, our stormwater design consultant, who has a landscape architect team on board to put together the finalize the park component design in the areas we've set aside. So that, yes, that would basically flow right into the next contract to have the playground surfacing and playground and fencing installed, your water fountain, and then some of that type of installation, though some of the base utilities and things are in the stormwater contract.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good day. Any more questions? Now H2 Spring Fishburne Phase 5, Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Phase 5 of Spring Fishburne, the pump station component. This is recommending approval of the construction contract with Ruby Collins. This is $37,301,795. That is both the construction of the pump station, and it also includes transferring the remaining pump procurement contract from the early procurement work where the city purchased those very large stormwater pumps directly from Xylem in advance, basically shifting that contract over to the contractor, as well as the remaining payments on it, which are included within that construction contract. This does establish the project budget, as well as providing the same allowance for up to $100,000 modifications within the existing budget. The funding is King Street Gateway TIF and the South Carolina Transportation Infrastructure Bank.
All right, any questions on this? I think this is a big moment we've been waiting on, right, Mr. Fountain?
That's right. So the last construction we have planned for the Spring Fishburne project to install those pumps and make it work well at high tides and extreme storm events.
Man, that's like you need to have a topping out celebration.
Move for approval.
Second.
Probably moved and seconded. Again, great job, Mr. Fountain, you and your team. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Item 3, Spring Fishburne. I don't know whether we should have taken those together or what, but anyway.
It's okay, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yes, this is basically the CE&I contract for the Spring Fishburne Phase 5 work with Davis and Floyd. So it's under the contract mechanism fee amendment number 27, $6,120,790. It provides the construction, engineering, inspection services for Phase 5 of the project. Same funding source and project budget as the above item.
Move for approval.
Properly moved and seconded. Under discussion, Mr. Fountain, once we get this finished, will we have enough money left to carry you to lunch?
We are very tight on the budget, but even with the insanity of inflation the last couple of years, we've ended up being within 1.5% or so of what we had originally anticipated.
Really?
Going back 4 years ago for this project. So we are feeling really good about the budget at this point, and we may actually hit it depending on what allowances and the line items we use within the contract.
That's awesome, including COVID, On the other side of COVID, we knew what happened with all construction. That's just wonderful. Great news. Carry the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Cooper, item 4, H4, Cooper Jackson Drainage Improvement.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna share my screen on this one just because it's one that the committee might not be quite as familiar with. This is the stormwater project is the Cooper Jackson's the Upper East Side drainage improvements. This is a related activity that we're doing under the stormwater project where the city design center and planning group have envisioned relocate or realigning Grace Bridge Street, which is the street that kind of runs through the parking lots out there, the gravel parking lots just north of the cigar factory. There's a public road that runs in those. The design center has recommended as part of this stormwater project, we shift and realign Grace Bridge Street with Lee Street to create a continuous run of Lee Street out to Morrison. That makes basically the remaining parking lots more useful for potential future development or other activities by cleaning up the space. You can see kind of horizontally how that would look in plan view on the left, what it would look like in the bottom right from a road profile, adding in some parking, streetscaping, sidewalk, leaving some room for CWS utilities that are out there. The top right, you can see the picture of what Grace Bridge Street looks like today. It has some foundation issues. You've been out there. It's a little bit like driving down a roller coaster at the moment. Basically, what we're going to be doing for stormwater is putting very large new stormwater pipes through this area. And what we're trying to do is make sure wherever we put those new pipes, that's where the road goes. And also that whenever the road is built, it does not immediately conflict with the very expensive new large stormwater pipes that have been placed. So the idea here is just to design the road, not to build it as part of the stormwater project, but to design the road to make sure there's no future conflicts in this realigned pathway, which means that stormwater pipes would also move up to this realigned pathway when they're being installed. So the work itself is in work authorization 11 with AECOM. It would be $107,244 to do the geotech and the design and permitting work for the road. It would be funded under the existing Cooper River Bridge TIF allocation into this project area, which is $3,160,723 from the previous TIF borrowing. If there's any questions, happy to provide more information.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Probably moving second. And any more discussion on that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fountain.
I have a quick question, Mr.
Councilman
Chairman.
Shea.
So, just out of curiosity, Matt, we were discussing at real estate, this property over by Jerusalem Baptist Church. And there was some drainage easements or some drainage questions about that Councilmember Waring had brought up. And real estate, is this somehow connected to that property over there by Old Jerusalem Church by any chance?
It's connected in the sense that the intent of this Upper East Side drainage project is to try to help relieve the relatively systemic flooding across this entire neighborhood, including those properties. The work we're doing is primarily pipe upsizing, which will help the properties drain out much quicker or improve performance during low tide events. There is a challenge still during very high tide events when it rains, and that a lot of the ground out here, including that land over by the New Jerusalem Church, is often at elevation like 5, which means in an 8-foot tide, the water from those properties cannot drain. It is stuck in the streets until the tide comes down.
Interesting. I thought I'd just ask, Mr. Chairman, since we had that discussion earlier.
Right. Actually, it was a good discussion. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor, call the question. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Discussion on H5 Church Creek Drainage Basin projects. Actually, some of this you touched on what was it, H1?
That's right,
It's
Mr.
been a while
Chairman. Yeah.
since we kind of had any discussions on anything major that is to come out there. And I just wanted to find out where are we from where we were and when we hired. What's the name of the firm we hired, Mr. Fountain? The study
The most recent one was Weston and Sampson.
Weston and Sampson. So from Weston and Sampson report to where we are now as far as kind of being solution oriented? What do we contemplate?
So I can give you certainly a quick overview.
Thank you.
We did go back when we've had a more recent contract with Biohabitats, which actually has Weston and Sampson as a sub-consultant, doing some stormwater modeling for them, looking at these flood storage projects.
Okay.
So this is under the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, but they've done some more conceptual work earlier in the process. The projects that we're currently working towards are shown on this drawing or this map. The Wolk Drive and Mallard Court sites kind of in this bottom corner. The Bridgepoint Townhome site, which is a little bit larger in this upper section. And then the Crosstown Church site, which is a significantly larger site between Bees Ferry Road and the railroad track. And you can see they're all connected through this kind of spine of drainage systems that run through the Shadow Moss, Church Creek neighborhoods. Wolk Drive, Mallard Court, kind of bottom right was what it looked like during some of the recent flood events and the 2015, 2016, 2017 events. The upper left is the layout of what we're doing. The right section, we have built the first portion of it to get some immediate flood relief into the streets and neighborhood. The contract we just approved will build the left section and connect the two of the pipe and create an outfall for this to bring it back into that large canal system that we saw to make it work more efficiently. That was a more complex permitting effort, so it took a little bit longer, but that's what's going in next. So that should start construction in the next few months.
Go back to that drawing. How does the water get into the where's the inlet? I guess, yeah.
So the water actually comes into this from the streets. So the roads, there are curb cuts that basically we took some of the curb out and the water comes into the site. We've dug the site down from the elevations that it was at down to be lower than the street. And the water basically comes off the street. The bottom right picture, that's the street that is underwater. So the idea is to cut the street, bring it into the project site, and then it's stored in both sites. It will flow from this site across the street to this Wolk Drive site, and then actually flows behind the homes up to the major canal that runs back here that you can't quite see in this picture.
That's okay. All right, that's good. Thank you.
Yep. And then this is the Bridgepoint Ecological Park. So the top right and bottom right are kind of pictures of the flooded townhome areas that you may remember from a large number of newspaper stories and different presentations. We did buy those, as you mentioned, and demolish them under a FEMA grant. This is the ecological park like landscape sketch for what it will look like. So it'll basically be a series of wetland meadows where you have intermittently wet areas that are kind of grassy and have a lot of wetland vegetation in them with some highland in between them. It's a little bit more forested style wetland. There'll be the highest part of the site. It'll have a playground play structure on it. And then we'll have walking trails that go around the site with some smaller bridge type structures. So you can walk and look at nature, and we're considering putting in a fishing dock at some point, some of that kind of thing for the surrounding. Around this whole section is sort of a very large drainage canal that runs around the whole property, which is what you see flooding over into the townhomes in these pictures. So that will start again construction in the next couple of months as we approve that contract.
So how many acres is that? Will that be?
This site is between 5 and 6 acres, depending how you count it. The Mallard Court Wolk Drive sites are about an acre in combination, and then the Crosstown Church area is around 13 acres. So this is basically the area between Bees Ferry and the railroad track. You can see on the bottom right, there's sort of an existing canal. It's where the canal comes out to the railroad track from Bees Ferry Road. We're looking to do sort of what's on the bottom left here, where we reconnect a lot of the wetlands in this area to that canal, which have been disconnected over the years, to let basically the canal overflow into the wetlands rather than overflowing into the church. In order to do that, we'll basically put some berms and walls around some of the church properties to prevent the water from coming to their properties, and instead push it over into those wetland properties that we're acquiring, as well as doing some vegetation and remediation in those areas, providing some additional storage again.
About how much would that cost? Do we have a ballpark figure?
That one's still in final design. So it depends on how much wall we end up having to build. It'll likely be some combination of berm and short retaining wall. So there's a little bit of a variation there. We'll get some better pricing back after we finalize that next stage of design, but still on the order of probably a few $1 million at least for the work.
So we'll be getting that information back in 24.
That's right.
Good, thank you.
And then that project is in design now. We're finalizing some property acquisition with some of the neighbors that had come through council last year, and then finalize our permitting. That'll let us finalize our permitting and go to construction hopefully in towards the end of 2024. The other project we're working on right now is a pond upfit evaluation. So you can kind of see there's a number on this bottom left. You get these sort of somewhat orphan ponds, like we'll talk about a little bit later with one of Councilman Shade's items around Shadow Moss and Church Creek, where Shadow Moss has a series of neighborhood associations, but many of them don't have traditional like HOA fee structures with the pond maintenance. Many of the ponds were built by developers and then just either turned over to the HOAs without fees to maintain them, and sometimes without deed restrictions and things like we would have in a more modern development. So what we're looking at, we've got a lot of requests similar to other areas of requests to maintain these or do something to clean these out. In Church Creek, there's the potential that we could add storage into a lot of these ponds because most of the flooding here is not tidal flooding, it is rainfall based flooding. Like there is some elevation here, it just can't get the water out because of the railroad constrictions and then the tidal creek that's below the railroad, where even if you open up the railroad, you still have a tidal creek it can't flow through. So we've got a consultant looking at all of these ponds, trying to identify which ones does the city have some control over, or is there the potential for us to easily get control over without spending money? And then could we lower the water level in those ponds, which would make them perform slightly differently and would probably require landscaping of the pond, because most people, as we've talked about, really like a full pond, the look of a full pond in their backyard. That's part of why a lot of the ponds are so high in Charleston. We actually have developments going in the Kanehoy Peninsula where they're lining the ponds in clay because their infiltration is so good, the pond would go completely dry if you didn't put clay in it. So they're intentionally putting clay in to hold the water in the pond so that it looks more like a full wet pond, even though from a stormwater management perspective, it's easier to have infiltration. But there's a potential on some of these where there's no kind of current maintenance regime for the pond to take over the pond, lower the water level, which gives you more storage, re-landscape it to make it still look really nice and make it easier to maintain and better for stormwater quality, and do quite a bit of flood relief. So that's kind of the ongoing, that's still in an early process. We're just in the kind of the concept stages out here with a consultant of looking at would this work and how much storage could we gain, but it might be an easy way to pick up relatively cheap storage and that the ponds are already constructed. We're not buying land, we're not digging out new ponds, we're really just cleaning up existing ponds and doing more with them because they weren't really designed to be stormwater features. A lot of the time they were dug out for borrow pits, or they were just a low wet area that existed on the property. So we're trying to kind of re-engineer them a little more efficiently. And then the last project that we had laid out as part of this original flood storage look was seeing if there's the potential to redirect water other places than kind of the existing outfall under those railroad tracks. This is kind of the Village Green neighborhood here for perspective of what we're talking about. So it's this area to the north. There was some concept that looks at development potentially one day. Could you push it out to the Ashley River instead of down through the Church Creek watershed where it goes now? And then the other developments that sort of sit more towards like the Grand Oaks area, continue to push those down more towards the Stono, which is something that the Long Savannah developers are looking at with their engineers, that they've been trying to push some of the water that was previously going towards the Stono towards Rantol's Creek. That lets them push some of the water that was going to Church Creek towards the Stono, and then basically reduce all of the flooding in these flood prone areas. So it's they're having pretty good success with it from some early reviews that we've had with their kind of large scale master planning. And I think they're on the right track that might end up resulting in some additional improvements to the flooding in the area. Again, these are not small, short-term, easy ones. These are these like very large scale, grand idea. But when things are as challenging as they are in the space, and sometimes you have to kind of go to that like very large visioning of redirecting watersheds out of the air. So that's where we are today as we get into design. are into construction on some of these projects, that'll free us up for the next round of design and conceptual plans. Because it's going to take more than what we've laid out so far, even to completely resolve flooding within the basin, for sure. That's a kind of quick upview of where we are now.
Okay, on this map right here, where is Glen McConnell Expressway? Is to the east?
Yeah, so this is the circle right here, with
Okay.
Beach Ferry coming this way, and then Glen McConnell coming here.
All right. So the future expansion of Glen McConnell would
kind of come through this way.
All right. And in that burnt orange area, is that developed? No, is that
No,
built?
that's all the land that is like north of the existing developments
Okay.
on
So
Highway
un-
61. This
undeveloped.
would be like the plantations kind of on this side of 61 here.
Gotcha. Councilman, Councilman, I don't know who hands was up first. Councilman.
I think
Shea.
Councilman Bowden was ahead of
Okay, I'm
me.
sorry, Councilman Bowden.
Thank you. So we talked at the meeting, at the last city council meeting, I was going to say a couple weeks ago, but I think it's been longer than that. That, there was an idea that maybe a pump station would be the way to achieve this, and due to the open drainage system, it's really not feasible. So are we still kind of in the same ballpark cost wise, or is it just unclear and we need to try to get as much money as we can?
So the existing projects are less expensive projects, but they also will not fully resolve the flooding. So there will be a need for additional projects. What we sort of did, instead of backing up and doing another grand study for 4 or 5 years and trying to find kind of a cure-all project with a price tag on it, we said, we know these projects will provide immediate flood improvement. Let's do some design and permitting. And we had some funding with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and get those going while we then start to look at additional future projects. So we're more on like a sequential like building program right now, where you build and get flood relief, and then you build and get flood relief, and then you build and get flood relief, rather than trying to do one giant build that hopefully will get you all of your flood relief. So we do not have a full conceptualized like project approach that would resolve all of the flooding and how much money that would be at this point, Councilman. We still need to keep working towards that. What we've done more effort wise is getting immediate flood relief in and under construction. And now that lets us freeze up our time to go back and look at the next set of projects and see if we can add more flood relief in. So we know we will need more money. We are absolutely, depending on what level of flood reduction you're looking, and presuming you're looking for very minimal flooding someday in the future, you will still need very large sums of money in the basin. And just for a refresher, I mean, that pump station was looking at basically taking water from here and pumping it out to the river here. So the challenge is you're draining this very large open creek system, which is hard to pull that water level down because you get groundwater inflow and you get wetland inflow. And then the effort to push that out through force mains to a creek that's a mile away is incredibly expensive. I mean, almost anything is doable, but the cost wise, I mean, you're likely into the hundreds of millions of dollars likely to do a project like that.
Okay. And then and maybe this is a longer conversation, we can just have it offline, but we're fortunate to have a very hardworking representative in our area now. And he's kind of like, with the Windermere one, he's asking, what do we need money for? Like what should he try to fight for in the budget? Where would you suggest starting with something like that?
So there's certainly the potential for the work around the church property. We generally refer to it as work around the church property just because it's a landmark that we're all familiar with in that area. There's work on a number of properties in that location, and work on the canal that is a city easement to restore that. That's going to be the next construction project that will come forward. And then this work on the ponds, I'm optimistic we'll see some significant improvements, but we're still pretty early on what the costs will be and what the benefits will be.
Councilman Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to continue with the line of questionings that Councilman Bowden had just brought up. And it seems to me that, Matt, this is, like you said, hundreds of millions of dollars in potential projects that is going to benefit a tremendous amount of people, including, I would suspect, as we develop along Savannah, the stress that that's going to create on flooding issues. And I think you've said this, but it seems like there needs to be some kind of method to prioritize these projects in a way that it makes sense. Sort of like you just don't want to do a project because you got the money to do that particular project. It seems like you want to do that project so that the next one that follows it is going to complement that and further the benefit of doing that. And I just don't know if I'm sure you've thought this out a little bit to some extent, but this committee should have some kind of role in helping you prioritize those particular projects in some kind of orderly fashion into how that's done. And I see Councilman Bowden's got his hand back up as we're continuing this, but because this is just such a critical area that and the folks out there are constantly being bombarded with this flooding problems out there. We've known about it for so long, and it intersects 3 different, maybe 4 different council districts out there. And with new development coming out there, it sounds like you just need a particular commission or committee who is helping guide this along the lines in some fashion, because it's just what you went through was pretty incredible. Right. As to the impact that this is going to have out there, not just present but future as well. So that's my 2 cents worth in trying to guide this and engage us somehow as to how you progress from A to Z with these particular projects.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Councilman Bowden, I think you had your hand.
Oh yeah, well, funny you mentioned that. I think we're going to be talking about that tomorrow night. There is a body that does that. It hasn't met since January of 2021. Part of that is because it was so clear the path that we were on dealing with Bridgepoint. And then, after that, I guess is sort of where the question marks come in. But so that's already in place, and I want to expand that a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow night.
Okay. So Mr. Fountain, as I understand it, the pump station that once had promised seems to be this is my vernacular, beyond the pale. So what's plan B, C, D?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I guess the current plan was the projects we talked about, the 3 flood storage projects, because those were modeled as providing some substantive stormwater drainage improvement in the area, flood relief. The ongoing work is that looking at existing ponds, we've also started some really early discussions with the golf course to see if we can restore some of the canals and ditches. I know Councilman Bowden's been a strong proponent of that and of offering to be the point of contact with golf wheels, who are generally pretty good to work with in the area, for restoring some of the ditches that exist on their side to hold water. These are all smaller type projects. I mean, there are lots of small projects combined together into a pretty large project. The Dutch Dialogue's recommendation, which is still a good one, was continuing to acquire flood-prone properties and using those properties for storage, especially if you can get areas along the canals, along some of the neighborhoods that are a little bit more flood-prone. Because that has a double benefit in that, one, it gives you that property to add storage, but it also reduces like how much flood improvement you need, because if you buy mostly the properties that are flooding at, say, an elevation of 10 feet, and now only properties flood when it gets up to 11 feet, you get a whole bunch of additional storage before people's homes are damaged. At least it's still not where we want to be from a total performance perspective, because you may have roads that are flooded, but it is another way to provide some short-term improvement from at least preventing home damage. And then the Other long-term approach we have currently is looking at this, what's on the screen, this kind of redirection of flow as these developments come in, which we're working through with Long Savannah right now. There's the potential, of course, depending what happens up on Highway 61, for this to shift depending where those developments end up being jurisdictionally, and how we handle those from a stormwater perspective, if those developments even come forward. And then we still need to go back to the engineering drawing board sort of and come up with what the next set of concerns and projects will be in addition to those other approaches.
Councilman Shealy, I see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members. I appreciate you giving me just a minute, and thank you, Mr. Fountain, for all this information. I really appreciate it and appreciate all your work. I'm happy to see that the Church Creek Committee will be meeting again to try to push things along. I did want to ask about first where the Crosstown Church is, and if we're moving water through there more quickly, does that have any kind of negative effect on the lower basin if we're moving water beyond that church and downstream, I guess?
So that's a good question, Councilman Shealy. So what we're actually going to do is slow the water down around the church and hold it in the land around the church by acquiring some existing wetlands or kind of questionable quality wetlands that are out there and helping them become more efficient wetlands, and then buying some highland that's in the area and cutting soil out of it, similar to what we're doing on Bridgepoint to provide more stormwater storage. So you're right, because part of the risk is we can't push too much water downstream of the railroad track because it'll get caught in that, what is the actual Church Creek, the tidal long interflowing creek there with a lot of structural flooding along it. And we can't get it out of that creek faster because you're not able to dredge, miles of tidal creek like that, realistically, permitting wise. So if we push too much water that way, you end up flooding homes between the railroad track and Highway 61 potentially. So instead, that's why we're looking to do these storage and redirection approaches instead.
And along those same lines, I guess, when you go into the lower basin, you've got a culvert that goes under Ashley River Road. Is that something that needs to be looked at? I know originally we said, no, not really. It didn't, but I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of water going through a small area at Ashley River Road.
No, that's a very good question. That's one we do want to look at again in the future, to determine one, could you upsize it to help get water out faster during large rain events? And also, which is far more complicated and expensive, but potentially something worth looking at, is could you put some kind of muted tide structure on it to prevent the highest high tides from coming in and tidally flooding a lot of the homes that are along that tidal creek? And obviously that's a very healthy tidal creek, so you don't want to damage the salt marsh along that creek by cutting off the tidal flow completely. But we've had more and more interest and support from some of the permitting groups about the potential to cut off just those highest tides as they come in, rather than cutting off like the day-to-day tides. So it's something we want to look at as another potential option out there.
Thank you. And pond maintenance was mentioned too. And I know that in Providence Common area, there's a lot of ponds that flow into each other and eventually into Lake Goddard. And those ponds are in rough shape too. If those could possibly be looked at, I know it would be appreciated. I get complaints from constituents all the time that those ponds are covered over with limbs, branches, and pond grass and everything else in those areas. I guess that's similar to what you're talking about when you're talking about pond maintenance. But if those could get attention, it sure would. I know it would be very much appreciated by the people that live in those communities as well. And I know, in the original Church Creek study basin, I know that it was also obviously those Long Branch culverts were mentioned in there and keep that water flowing out. I hope, I know that the pipes weren't put in there, but hopefully that work's going to continue as well, as far as Long Branch under 17 and under the Greenway and the other place where there's a culvert there as well. So hopefully work continues there and we can move forward there as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Fountain, what about was it Harmony? Did we work out? Are we still in the process of working out a compromise with that. Help me out, Councilman Shealy. What's the name of that
Yeah.
subdivision? Is it
Yeah,
Harvard?
Ms. Copeland's probably coming off mute to handle that one, I think.
Yeah,
All
there
right,
you
Ms.
go.
Copeland.
I was
Good.
going to say the same thing.
Yes, so we are working out the details of the settlement documents with Harmony, which would entail us buying back 125 acres. Using some of the funding for that will be used with grant money that we'd be applying for as well, to turn into a passive park and potentially some water mitigation areas as well.
Okay. So now taking that, Mr. Fountain, what type, do we know what type of water mitigation that would take? Another retention area for timing, basically, before it gets into Church Creek?
So it will depend a little bit on the final negotiations there. That is the section between the railroad track and Highway 61.
Right.
So that will provide likely some stormwater flood relief in that area. That area, as we talked about, is also tidally flood prone, which makes it so complicated as opposed to the upland areas where you don't see a lot of tidal flooding, even though when you get a high tide, it does trap the water north of the railroad track. It doesn't directly tidally flood. So yes, there would be some improvement from rainfall flooding in those areas. But if the tide comes up high enough, the tide will fill in anything that you can dig out. So it is a yes, sometimes it will be better than it would have been, and sometimes it will not if there's enough tide. It's still an improvement, still a reduction how frequently something floods.
Have we identified the houses that are most vulnerable? Obviously, Bridgepoint was, ground central. Have we identified, if we did come up with monies for buyouts, which houses we'd like to go after first?
That's what we're working on now, Mr. Chairman. It's a good point. So one of the things our floodplain program is doing is starting to lay out areas where we think acquisition would be a good idea. Primarily, the city in the past has looked, other than a few selected acquisitions, has looked when we have interest from residents looking for us to purchase their homes. We've been trying to come up with more information and more engagement with neighborhoods about that being an option for homes that are repetitively flooded. So let them know that that's out there.
Okay. All right. Any questions from any more council members? Listen, Mr. Fountain, I really appreciate the update, and I think everybody in the meeting did. So we still got work to do, big work to do. H6, Lake Daughter flood mitigation. Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this was an item that the mayor and Councilman Shealy had discussed at the last council meeting, requesting that we clarify that the existing $1.5 million drainage fund allocation to relieve flooding in Lake Daughter through the Glen McConnell pipe installation, that those funds could be used as well for other necessary drainage improvements and flood mitigation in the lake. Particularly, we've been looking at, could you elevate the dam separating Church Creek from Lake Daughter to prevent that tidal water from flowing into the dam and filling up the dam, which we've seen a number of times. And then could you potentially excavate any of the existing highland in here or in any of the other areas to provide some additional storage, or as Councilman Shealy mentioned, even conceptually, could you even improve any of the ponds that kind of tie into Lake Daughter in the meantime? So that's something we would like to do an RFQ and get a consultant on board. That Charleston County has said they're going to their council for making that same request with a portion of the funding that they were dedicating towards this project. And I think it's a good path forward to do those preliminary engineering reports and see where we can go.
Any questions or observations from committee members? Councilman Shealy.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Fountain. So, Mr. Fountain, you believe that we can move fairly quickly on this, I guess, once county council approves the matching funds or a portion of the matching funds, that we would be able to move fairly quickly on some things there?
So we would release a request for qualifications and try to hire a consulting firm to come in and basically look at these couple of different project approaches and make a recommendation from a cost benefit perspective, which one makes the most sense and what combination of them, if it's a combination, and what level of protection we would be expected to see, how much would that construction cost, and let us potentially go all the way into construction, or depending on the total cost, at least come back for additional allocation into funding for that work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That item is on Ways and Means, Mr. Chairman. This is just making sure if there are questions or any comments, and whether we want to vote to recommend Ways and Means, make the approval for it.
Okay. All right.
It's no new money at this point. It is just a reallocation or a clarification to that existing drainage fund money.
All right, good. All right. Hopefully we get some relief some way, somehow out there. Thank you. If there aren't any more questions or observations, let's go to H7. Discussion on ponds in the Charleston area. Councilman Shade.
Right, this is more of not ponds, more of lakes, and we talked about this with Lake Sandhurst. And I think that Matt's department was going to look at any other type of lakes or bodies of waters that fit this category. And so here we are. Looks like Matt's got a graph up here for us to talk about ponds and lakes in the city of Charleston.
So you sure that's not the county?
So this is the entire county, at least. This is the study for South Carolina Sea Grant that they did in 2013, looking at aerial imagery. They're actually in the process of updating this right now for more modern photography, which will be very interesting to see how many ponds have we built over the 10 years since this last study. But as of 2013, the entirety of Charleston County, and it's not the greatest photo on earth here, but you can see James Island, West Ashley, Johns Island, and then certainly Mount Pleasant and North Charleston kind of being the lion's share of the ponds in Charleston County, with some split thereof. But at that time, there were 1,831 development-related ponds in the county. So not all of those being in the city. Certainly we see some in North Charleston, some in Mount Pleasant, and some in probably Town James Island as well. But very large number of ponds. They also looked at non-development related ponds. There are a number of those as well in Charleston County, but those start a little bit more in some of the outlying areas. It gets a little more complicated when you start looking at like old timber plantations and amenity ponds, those kinds of things. But what we've looked at is, with those ponds, what could you do? Like, we don't necessarily want to get into the business, in our opinion, of taking over maintenance of all of the ponds in the city unless we are very committed to a very large revenue generation to do that work. It is something we talk about that City of Charlotte and some other entities have looked at in the past, and I have not yet found an entity that continued forward with doing it because of the cost burden for maintenance. What we have looked at, we've talked about some of these types of projects today, is if you can do a capital project where the pond is part of your project, there can be justification in taking over an individual pond. So the one we talked about generally today was the second item, that if you have rainfall-based flooding, you can look at taking over a pond to improve the pond potentially and relieve the rainfall-based flooding, because it's often a place to get very inexpensive land, if not free, because ponds are very low in land value traditionally. If there is the potential to lower that water table or expand the pond or do something that reduces flooding, that might be a very good project. We've done some of those in the past. Some of Ardmore has ponds that the city had built along the edge of the bikeway or even onto some of the private properties to help relieve flooding in that area. We just talked about the potential for it in Church Creek and in Lake Dotterer. The other option is the first one up top, where there are many ponds that we have, especially these older 1950s, 60s era ponds, that are not really providing a flood protection perspective, and that they were really created as amenities, where someone generally dammed up an existing like tidal marsh section and then dug out that marsh section to make a pond, an amenity, normally for swimming or boating. There is the potential on those, even though you couldn't do anything to improve stormwater flooding, because otherwise you just have a direct discharge to marsh, which is about as good as you can get from a stormwater perspective, assuming the land is high enough that it's not tidally flooding. That's an important caveat. But if the land is high, you could alternatively restore that tidal marsh where there is now pond, which those salt marsh mitigation credit banks are incredibly valuable resources if it's a large enough pond. They're very hard mitigation credits to buy. There's very few of these around the state because there aren't a lot of places where people are willing to turn coastal highland properties into salt marsh, because the real estate value is, impossibly high on most coastal highland property. But technically you could do the same thing with a pond. It's not free and it certainly is not easy, but you then create those credits and you can either sell the credits or use them on our own projects, which we often need salt marsh credits, as does the county or other entities in the area. So that is something there's not always the same level of support from the residents around the pond. Some people really like living on salt marsh, some people do not. So there is a more of a question of would the pond neighbors support that type of work, but it is an option if you're looking for restoration. Those are very low maintenance because once you've returned it to marsh, the only thing you have to do, which is not negligible, but you have to just make sure you keep those outfall channels cleared if you do have pipes that run through that marsh section.
So how do we identify the ones that in the latter category you just described as being, which ones are possible with neighbors? I mean, seeing the big picture versus.
Yeah, so currently we would do it on like an individual case-by-case basis as we were looking at capital projects or even small allocation projects potentially. I don't know that I would want to step back and like screen every pond in the city for whether it could or could not be used, and that that's a very large effort. We could look at doing it, but that would be a capital project in and of itself to go through and screen every one of the ponds in the city. So right now we're doing it in areas where we have a capital project, we're incorporating it, or we could incorporate it into our work on those projects or evaluation of potential projects.
Okay. Councilman Sheehan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Matt, thanks for that. I would like to see if we could break that down into exactly which of these bodies of water, ponds, lakes are in the cities versus those in the county. Take that out and get an update. But also one of the criteria I think that you may want to consider is whether or not that the existence of that body of water provides some benefit to the city. And the point being that with Lake Sandhurst, the runoff from the streets dredge right into this pond, which has contributed to some of the issues that these landowners are experiencing. And Matt made a very good point bringing this up. Some of these ponds or lakes were developed or incorporated as part of the neighborhood development as an amenity, and so the landowners got a benefit from that, and still may have some type of collateral benefit to date, even if it's not using for boating or fishing, but it's still the aesthetic part of it provides some value as well. But if the whole point of bringing this discussion up is that the city had gotten a huge benefit from allowing the water to run off into this lake, which has created a silting issue that these folks are dealing with. So I don't think that they're looking for 100% responsibility from the city taking over, but they're looking for at least some help on addressing this issue and how to clean those out. So I like what you got up here, Matt. I mean, I think this is a good starting point for discussion. I don't want to see this sort of fade off into the sunset, and I want to continue this discussion and get some kind of movement on it to help address some of these other issues that other folks may be throughout the city addressing. Because Matt's right. I mean, you look at 1,800 potential ponds, and the prior report we got from Matt on flooding projects in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Unfortunately, we don't have that level of resources to address all of these flooding issues and now take on this project of mitigation with lakes. But it goes back to that same recurring issue I have as to the city is getting the benefit of the runoff water, and these folks are being harmed by that. Where's the balance with this? How do we balance that out to provide some level of that? So hopefully we can come back with more definitive answers on this and more discussions on this, because I think this is going to become more of an ongoing issue beyond just what we're talking about today, Mr. Chairman. And appreciate Matt's update on that. And I'm just not sure where we go from this particular point forward. We do need to continue this this discussion and get to some resolution sooner or later.
I agree. I saw a council lady who was rotating off North Charleston Council. I don't know, Mr. Fountain, if you saw a couple of articles. She said some of these retention ponds, well, I don't know, was it 1960 or something like that, or like no man's land. There's no regulations on them.
Yep.
There's some that's coming on board now, but it's like nobody wants to touch these things. But you're right, it's gonna come back. Ms. Parker, I see your hand.
Hey, I appreciate it. I'm not
Yeah.
on the committee, but
It's
since
okay. Go ahead.
we've spent a little time on ponds, Matt, have you talked to Katie at all about, in our resiliency office? I mean, I know there are a lot of nature-based solutions to some of the ponds. I know I've seen in our area, we don't in our neighborhood, but I know it's not a big, these aren't big fixes, but maybe if there's something that she could pull together for these communities. There are a lot of nature-based, it's really falling. I'll think of it on, I'll think about it and figure out the name of it, but like living shorelines or I'll think of the name tomorrow, Matt, but I don't know if maybe Katie might know more, and it might help some of these communities to know that information.
Okay. Matt, you want to respond?
Sure, Mr. Sherman. So yeah, I think Councilman Parker, it's a good point. I think giving education outreach, Ashley Cooper Cooperative Extension does a master pond manager training class that it does cost some money, but they target it towards HOAs and other pond managers, and they certainly spend a lot of time on nature-based solutions to help bring down your maintenance costs, which is very important. I think that's a great suggestion. We certainly try to publicize that a little bit more, get that information out there.
Okay. All right. I think Ms. Parker's question's been answered. I see her hand still up, but anyway. Any other input? Again, Mr. Fountain, you uplift our intelligence level with all we have to do, frankly, with your research. No, thanks a lot, man. All right. H8, Sweetgrass Creek.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sherman. So this is the area that we're talking about, Sweetgrass Creek. It's in James Island in Councilman Parker's district. Sort of a mix mash of town of James Island and city properties. The primary flooding is kind of what you see in this upper left section here, where the road has some water that comes across it. Kind of in this area, there's an outfall in that location that basically has a pipe that backs up pretty regularly because the marsh mud is high enough that it fills up the pipe, similar to many other areas we have. So probably some outfall cleaning is necessary in order to get it to work. There may be some slight challenges with easements and things in the area that we need to clear up too, but kind of falls into one of our lists where we need outfall permitting in order to be able to make much of a impact. So I have a general update on where we are in the permitting as well. Initially we've talked about this a few times in the past that we've been cleaning under individual Army Corps of Engineer permits from the Army Corps and OCRM. Those were typically taking us somewhere around 18 to 24 months to go through the permitting process. It's meant, the individual permitting process is meant to be like a customized, very complex permitting situation for difficult, unusual projects. We had this discussion over the last probably 5 years now with the Corps and DHEC saying outfall cleaning shouldn't be handled that way. It's a relatively straightforward process. They did agree with us in collaboration with a number of other coastal communities all along the South Carolina coast. We've worked with them to develop regional general permits, which are supposed to be a faster pathway towards permitting. They're a little more simplified, similar to nationwide's, but they're not nationwide. They're only regional. That's why they're called regional permits in the kind of Army Corps parlance. We hired a consulting company to do a pilot outfall project under this new general permitting. They prepared an application. We got our first permit in October. That one took us maybe 11 months to go through the permitting process this time. We've done some follow-up meetings with the legislative delegation and the Army Corps and OCRM talking about what we can do to speed up that process further. There've been some relatively good conversations coming out of that. We've taken those conversations hired the same consulting company to now basically build a template application off of what they've learned from this original pilot outfall project. We're doing the template at the same time we're doing an application with the template. And then the idea is if we don't get any substantive comments on the template and we get a relatively quick outfall permit, hopefully this time around, we will then be able to do a large batch of outfall cleaning permits in 2024 with the new project manager who actually started today for the small project. It's the small project manager that we've been trying to hire for the last 18 months. He did start today, which is great. So one of his first tasks next year will be taking that outfall template application and building probably somewhere around 10 batches of 10 outfalls that we need to clean, and then going through that process, which should let us hopefully start speeding up how fast we clean. Then we just need to utilize the funding and try to be as efficient as possible cleaning those outfalls, because there's still the main method that the Corps allows still is hydro excavation, which is unfortunately very expensive, but is ecologically very light touch. That is a very short overview of where we stand on outfall permitting, but we still have a lot of interest from both the state legislative delegation and many of our federal representatives on how this is going. So it continues to be a point of discussion for us, DOT, Seabrook, Charleston County, John James Island. It's a Sullivan's Island. It's a big topic in the area.
Okay. Councilwoman Parker, you have any questions, follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Matt. I know that no doubt you have received, this has been going on long before I think I've been on council. I guess my concern just lies in, I understand why it's taking so long. Because I think we've at least navigated the multi-jurisdictional. I mean, we are the jurisdiction that needs to submit the permit for this particular outfall. Correct?
We are. There's a question
Right.
on how clean the easements are, whether we need to acquire some easements from the property owners in order to do the outfall cleaning. But yes, we are the jurisdiction where that outfall exists within, it looks like.
And so again, is it, just to clarify, are we, I know at one point we were talking about, the city really wanted to package these permits rather than just do these, obviously one at a time because it's very expensive. But I know you have a lot on your plate, Lord knows that, but I just don't feel like we've made a whole lot of movement. And I understand that it's a tricky process because it's one thing, it seems like it should be an easy process, but when we're dealing with marsh, delicate marsh area, it's not, it's confusing. So I'm just wondering, I mean, we've used, we've had this consultant, they've been kind of preparing these applications. I see that we received a first permit in October, and I apologize if I missed where that was for. But now we're preparing a template with that same consultant, and so I assume it will include this outfall.
So the consultant is doing the template, which means they're basically taking the comments they got through the year of permitting they did on the, which I did not say the location. It's the Peachtree outfall in Wagner Terrace. It drains a significant portion of Wagner Terrace. Mm-hmm. They're taking the comments that they got along the year-long process to get that permit to build the template as they do a relatively straightforward application. Then the idea is to take that template and do a batch of permits with that template.
Okay, so again, so we did apply for the Wagner Terrace permit, just the one, and I understand. Okay,
that's a funded small project and the small project allocation.
Okay, well, is that something that we need to look at for this rather than continue? Again, I mean, I've been here for 2 years, so I know that this has at least been 2 years, and as far back, I'm sure that it goes back further. But I mean, is that something? Should we maybe be looking at it as a small project for James Island?
We certainly could. As I mentioned, we'll have to figure out how we fund the cleaning of all of the outfalls that we need to clean, whether we run that as part of our IDC work or whether we set it up as a small project allocation. the challenge so far has been the effort level on the permitting is so high. We've been trying to bring that effort level down per permit. So we weren't basically right now an effort, those permits are roughly the same equivalent level of doing a whole small project. So if you're trying to say get 10 or 20 outfall permits, that would take 2 or 3 years of our small project project manager group just to do those outfall permits. So the idea was to try to get to a template approach where we would be able to do, say, 10 of them as if it was a single small project from having that template. And that's where we're trying to get to. And yes, it has certainly taken a long time to get there. That's something that continues to be a challenge with the outfall permitting.
Yeah, and I mean, I see. I mean, we intend to submit in 2024, but what part of 2024 do you think that's really, doable? Obviously, I was very optimistic coming in. I know this was a confusing process, but seeing that it's taken this long to kind of get to this point, again, at no fault of anyone here at the city, but I mean, where do you think, what quarter will that happen in to submit those? Because if and when they get submitted, how long will it take to then do the work? We then have to allocate the dollars and fund the project, or what? Give me a timeline there.
So it very much depends on how long the core and OCRM take to review the template application project. I mean, optimistically, they will not take the 11 months or so that it took for the first permit. Originally, their goal was to be somewhere on the 2 to 3 month range, but obviously they have not yet hit that. They have restaffed. They had a huge amount of turnover in their staffing. There's a new lieutenant colonel as well. They seem to be much quicker in the last couple of months since the new lieutenant colonel has come in. So we're optimistic that will continue to happen, and we will be able to submit something much sooner than that. But it's very hard to put a timeline on some other agency that I have no time control over, unfortunately. So in a scenario looking at past results, it would be another 11 months before we would have a template, and then we'd be preparing those and not submitting until 2025. In a more optimistic scenario, we would have our template results in 3 months, and then it would take us another 3 months to fill out our permit applications and submit in middle of 2024.
Okay. And I apologize. I know I was hoping Mark Johnson from the town could be here. He's obviously been really involved, and the town has been, had these outfall permits that have needed to be completed as well. So I guess we will just circle back with him, and were you able to speak with him?
I have spoken with Mark a number of times about outfall cleaning. They're certainly supportive of the city cleaning outfalls that would benefit their jurisdiction.
Of course. So, okay, last question. So maybe a dumb question, but the Army Corps, is this the same Army Corps? I mean, obviously different departments that's helping us with the PED phase, things like that. I mean, what different departments, same people? What are we talking about?
It is the same Army Corps office. It is the two different departments. So as you're mentioning, the project management team that Mr. Morris works with the Army Corps of Engineers also has to go through the same regulatory permitting process. And one of their biggest challenges in the PED phase has been figuring out how to deal with marsh impacts and marsh mitigation and things from the regulatory side of the Army Corps. So it is, as you mentioned, always a very sensitive subject whenever you're in salt marsh for the environmental permitting.
I know. And again, and this is in no way, Mr. Fountain, directed at you. It just feels like the priority, might be elsewhere. And that's the difficult part here on James Island when we have something like that, it is seen as a small project, but we can't move forward with it because one, we are looking at a bigger picture item, or two, we have to pile it in with other projects. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I don't.
As I mentioned, I think we had 18 months of a vacant position for that project manager, the small project manager. So it absolutely does get to be a crunch trying to find a way to keep everything moving forward. So you're right.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, thank you for the update. I guess I'll circle back with Mr. Johnson at the town and anyone else you think it might be helpful. And I will just continue to stay optimistic that we get these outfall permits in 24.
Yep, thank you. No, I think that's the right way to do it, is just keep staying with us and making sure we're continuing to move the outfalls forward. I mean, they are moving, they're just moving very slowly. And we would like them to
Right.
go faster as well. And I think, the Corps and OCRM at the last legislative delegation very much committed to trying to speed them up on their end as well. So
Yeah.
hopefully with their new staffing, they've got quite a bit of new staffing over there. Hopefully they'll be able to accelerate things on their side at least.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Perfect.
Councilmember Waring, I think you're on mute.
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Have you seen anywhere, Mr. Fountain, across the country where any cities or governments outsource this permitting process to private firms to navigate that?
To
Well,
apply for the permits or to review the permits?
I mean, apply for the permits.
So we've outsourced the permits. We don't apply for our own permits. These are all outsourced at the moment to consulting firms.
Wow. Okay. You're way ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
H9, discussion of recommended potential updates to the city floodplain ordinance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been working through a number of issues, as you've been aware of, on trying to deal with floodplain regulations and some challenges that regulating the floodplain puts on our citizens. And we had some recommendations for the committee to consider for potential ordinance amendments or ordinance revisions. I'm just going to run through the four top ones very briefly. The first one, I think, is one that would be well received pretty much all around, which is, as you're familiar with the current substantial improvement, substantial damage calculation, where if you basically incur the cost of 50% of the value of the structure on your property, not your land value, but just your structure value, you have to bring your property into compliance with current floodplain regulations, which often means elevating homes, which can be very, very challenging. That the city previously had set that up as a 5-year cumulative number, where all the work you do over 5 years leads towards that calculation. We would like the committee and council to consider reducing that to a 1-year cumulative number. It does very slightly reduce the number of CRS points that you would receive, but it's a very minor reduction. I think there was a lot of good intent with the 5-year cumulative. What you're really looking at originally was trying to prevent people who are doing like modifications to their home from breaking up the work, year after year to avoid regulation, even though they knew they were building a very large project. Unfortunately, because of the damage scenario, what's happened to a lot of people is that, say you flip a house or you work on a house and sell it to another homeowner, the new homeowner buys that home, not necessarily realizing all the ramifications of permitting regulation. If the previous owner had put in 40% of the value of the home on renovation work, and then this next year a hurricane hits and you need a new roof, you can potentially end up in a substantial improvement, substantial damage situation, mostly because of work that was done by a previous owner. There can also be challenges with disclosure if there was damage that wasn't applied for permits, and then you're finding out after the fact permitting and other challenges. So I think there's a lot of good intention with a 5-year cumulative, but I think the enforcement process of it can be very hard on especially new homeowners, or even homeowners that know what they're getting into. I mean, that's quite a risk to take if you do a large renovation on your house and then the next year have fire damage or hurricane damage or anything else. It can still trigger you into a substantial improvement, substantial damage situation, or you might need to elevate your home. So we do want people to build homes that are flood proof. We do want major renovations to consider, and if they're doing more than 50% work, be required to elevate the home appropriately when you're basically completely reconstructing your home from scratch. But we are strongly supportive of kind of getting rid of almost what is a trap of the 5-year cumulative, or can be for a new owner. So that was one item we wanted to bring up. The second and third ones are more just...
Mr. Fountain, before you leave that.
Absolutely, Mr.
I mean, I've got a bunch of, and I represent an older district. Unfortunately, a lot of those houses are built on grade. How does that, I mean, ton of houses in East Oak Forest, West Oak Forest, South Pine Point, a slab on grade. How would this affect them?
So it would generally reduce the chance that they had to elevate their home under the regulation. So instead of all the work or damage you've had in your home over a 5-year period being used to determine whether you're substantially improved or substantially damaged, it would only be over a 1-year period.
Okay.
So again, if you came in for a major renovation and we're going to spend more than 50% of the cost of your home, you'd have to elevate it.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have that if we get hit by 3 years of hurricanes in a row, which we have had happen to us recently. That it's not that third hurricane would push you over the limit because we'd be recalculating it each year.
Let's see what, for example, you could use your example, 3 hurricanes in a row and trees hit my bedroom. Next one hits the garage and next one hits the kitchen. None of it's flooding, but obviously I want to get those areas repaired. That's the part that kind of gets me, because a lot of these people got no place to go, man. Okay. But anyway,
So
obviously, I'm sure, as you said, with enough money, with engineering, you can do most things. But I've never seen a slab on grade, jacked up. I'm sure somebody's probably done it someplace, but I just never seen that, at least around here.
No, you're right. It's very expensive. It's often cheaper just to rebuild the house than it is to elevate with a slab on grade. You're correct, Mr. Chairman. There are exceptions it can work, but it's not always the case.
Right. Okay, so that's the part that I would caution on this is, and I'm not the only one that has represent people that slab on grade. So
No, you're absolutely right. And we can't eliminate substantial improvement, substantial damage. We have to have it from a floodplain perspective for the NFIP, but this would reduce the risk that people would be pulled into it, especially if they buy a new house and didn't know that it previously had damage or previously had repair work done to it. So it is generally more protective of existing homeowners and somewhat less protective of future flood resilience. So there is a trade-off, but I think it's one that's worthwhile.
Okay. All right.
The second one is, this is more of a cleanup that there's a freeboard requirement. It's applied for your lowest occupied floor where you have to be built 2 feet above the flood zone. We just need to clarify that includes equipment, machinery, basically like your HVAC and other equipment on your home. Our regulation is it's enforced this way and it's regulated this way. It's not clear enough in the ordinance for us to be certain that CRS will count it. And they have changed now. In order to be a Class 8 CRS, you have to have that in there, that you have your freeboard for equipment, machinery. So we're already enforcing it this way. It is the way it should be, but it's basically making sure people are elevating their HVAC systems and any other machinery associated with their home,
right?
So we can stay with a Class 8. And I think that's more of a housekeeping issue, just to clarify the ordinance. Shouldn't be a big challenge.
Right.
We definitely want to be at a Class 8 because that's only a 10% discount. We're already at a Class 6 with the city, which is a 20% discount. The next one is another clarification that right now, in order for a structure to be eligible for basically historic considerations, where FEMA has different requirements for historic properties than they do for non-historic properties because of the historic nature of the property. We currently have in our ordinance, if you're listed in SHPO, or if you're determined by SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, or if you're on a federal National Historic Register, you have that historic exemption. We'd like to add that if you are locally listed on a city historic property list, you could also be considered in that historic category. And that's allowed by the NFIP because they understand that a lot of cities have kind of their own historic considerations in addition to the state and federal ones. So I think that with our city's history of historic preservation and its efforts, I think that would be a good one to put in as well. And these are right now, Mr. Chairman, we're just discussing the concepts of them, and depending on what the input is from the committee, we come back with actual ordinance language for y'all to evaluate. So this is just discussion at this point for all of it. And the last one, this is the one that's a little more questionable. There's upsides and downsides of either option. The LIMWA, it's the limits of moderate wave action. I know we've had a long meeting and this is a lot of technical speak we're about to get into, but this is what's called the coastal A zone. It's where you still have wave action, but you're no longer in a V zone and a velocity zone where like big waves are hitting buildings. These are like the smaller waves, like 1 to 2 foot waves. The way that those are regulated right now is they are in the floodplain ordinance. They are just considered normal AE zone areas. In the state building code, though, the state building code has been updated to consider those basically as velocity zones. You have to build a building as if you were in a V zone, even if you are in an A zone where there is wave action. Most of the restrictions in the flood ordinance are those things related to buildings, which are already forced on us by the state building code. There is the potential, if the city wants to, it could consider adding those coastal A zone requirements to our floodplain ordinance as well. The building code things would not change because they're already incorporated into the building code, which we have to follow for the state. The only thing that would change is you couldn't use structural fill on your site. You can still do landscaping fill, you can do some fill for drainage, but you can't put in structural fill. The biggest change there is how you do road design. Right now, we require people to build up roads. If you treat the coastal A zone as a velocity zone, you can't build up your roads because there's a worry about wave deflection or impacts the roads from waves hitting the roads. Instead, the roads are built on grade. The downside there is it means the roads flood more frequently in high tides because you can't elevate them. Or you have places that are much harder to get to because you can't elevate or you can't add roads. But generally, you just build on-grade roads and have an exemption in the road ordinance. So this is worth a tremendous number of CRS points, like a whole extra 5% discount generally. It's what Folly Beach does in some other areas. I think Charleston County does it. It's one of the reasons they have such high insurance discount rates. There is a site development impact on this one. So I think this is probably one to talk about and have more discussions on, even if we do the first three. Again, pluses and minuses in that fourth item, definitely a way to pick up potentially more insurance discounts, but with many of those requirements already being placed on the city by the state building code, but there are some site development concerns if you're building roads within that coastal A zone. So I would, at this point, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend, we come back with ordinance language for those first three. And if we would like to have discussions with stakeholder groups on that fourth one, we certainly could and get some more input. I would suspect most developers and builders will not support it because it is a potential reduction to the usefulness of their site, makes their costs higher, a little more difficult to develop sites. But again, there is the potential for that insurance discount. So it's just something we wanted to bring up to council's attention, that there are some other entities that do this in the area.
Okay, Councilman Bowden.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we come back to this when we've had a less long meeting, and maybe I'm a little bit sharper and can think of some questions, because there's some interesting stuff there. I just need to kind of think about it a little bit. But I think Matt's suggestion was good, that we just come back with language on the first three, and think about the last one a little more. That seems to be where some contention would be.
Okay, Councilman Shade.
I would almost want to have a full workshop on this. This is really overwhelming, what Matt's talking about, and Councilmember Waring, with your points that you just brought up about particularly folks in your district, how this may impact them negatively and literally may run them out of their house. We're not careful with this. So I hate to say that I'm flooded with information on this, Matt, but this is a lot to consider, and surely whatever we do is going to come back and find a full council. But I think that the residual impact on this, if we are not careful, can be devastating to a lot of property owners. So I want to make sure that we tread very carefully with it. I see your point. I think I'm following you. But kind of along the lines of Councilman Bowden's talking about, this is a lot of information, and I really don't want to misstep this at all. So, Mr. Chairman, whatever is your pleasure on doing this, but we could dedicate a full meeting just on this one particular subject. And because what we do here, we're going to recommend to council how to proceed with that.
Right. I hear both of you gentlemen. I guess proceed with caution, Mr. Fountain. Actually, I kind of understand your point on the 5-year cumulative versus the 1 year. I understand that. One of the things that I'm thinking about there, if you took the East Oak Forest area, if the drainage system ever gets built, a lot of the flooding that takes place there, in particular rainfall flooding, they don't really have a lot of tidal flooding, but gushers, they do 3-4 inches of rain, they do. But to me, if we're trying to mitigate for flooding, if my kitchen caught a fire, I still got a problem with I understand I need to fix my kitchen back, but I don't understand why I had the added expense of floodplain, expenses when it wasn't flood damage. But anyway, so I agree with these two gentlemen. I think, do we run this by like any of the developers council or whatever that group is called with the chamber to get feedback before we come with an ordinance?
So certainly for the way the ordinances work with multiple readings, there's quite a bit of outreach and discussion that goes into the ordinance writing. We just wanted to have the initial discussions of, is this something we're even willing to consider writing ordinances for before we, kind of drop an ordinance on your desk and start reading legal language.
Well, that's why I'm getting some feedback from the other side that may also affect a potential ordinance, I guess.
Anyway. No, I agree. They tend to be, in my opinion, the most helpful when you give them a draft ordinance to look at rather than when you give them a concept to look at. But I think we could certainly get a draft ordinance together and have them start looking at it as well. I mean, I suspect they would understand where we're coming from items 1, 2, and 3 and have very little input. Item 4, I think they would generally oppose and say that any restriction on development is something that they're not going to be supportive of, but we could certainly discuss it with them.
Yeah, so let's Councilman Shade, I saw you.
I like that idea what Matt said about a proposed ordinance to review. I think once you have that in hand and see that in black and white, that helps. That's gonna help.
I know one suggestion we've had from our legal counsel is to consider doing just a full ordinance rewrite, because right now we have a relatively complex ordinance that has been amended a number of times, and we would like to take it back to more of like a 1-page long, very simple, straightforward ordinance to try to make it easier for everyone to review it as well.
That sounds good to me. Okay. Cliff Note version of the ordinance, right?
Pretty much, yes. So it doesn't have to be nearly as complicated as it is. It's just what happens when you keep amending things over time.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna wait for more information on this one, right?
We'll draft up an ordinance and come back with some more explanations and do some outreach to those groups about what their opinions are as well. I mean, again, I think we'll generally, item 1, as you mentioned, Councilman Shade, will actually be helpful for most of the residents of the city. There is certainly a slight harm to us as the city, and that we're not kind of enforcing as much resiliency to be put in. But as Mr. Chairman mentioned, that resiliency is normally borne at the cost of the existing property owner, which is challenging for a lot of people. So that is why I think it's worth doing, even though there is a slight downside to the city for it, potentially just from the negative impacts to its residents. And then items 2 and 3 are again relatively minor. Certainly want to have some input from Historic Charleston and Charleston Preservation on that one. And then the 4th one, I think, is where we would get real discussion on what we should or shouldn't do. So I almost like to break that one out as separate from our original ordinance rewrite and just have some longer ongoing discussions about whether we want to go that way or not as an entity.
Okay. Let me ask this on the, I guess, currently 5-year or even the 1 year. So I did some work on my house 1 year for $30,000, I guess, or 30% of the value of my house. And I come back 8 years later and do something else. Did the clock reset? Or
that's right. Even in the 5-year cumulative, the clock would reset. In the 1 year cumulative, it resets every year. And a 5-year cumulative, it resets every 5 years.
Yeah, I like that. I like the 1 year. 1 year sounding better every minute, by the minute.
Yeah, we've had a lot of challenges with how much turnover there's been in the housing market here of people buying a home and just not understanding how much work had been done to it and what risk they were at of hurricane damage causing or anything else, like you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, a fire suddenly triggering them and need to elevate a home they had just purchased.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thanks a lot all in on this one. The last item is what I had put on, and I thought a decent discussion with, I had an offline discussion with Mr. Fountain as well as, Ms. Copeland. Do we need to have discussion here and again at council tomorrow? Mr.
You don't
Fountain?
have any opposition from us remaining on this call.
Yeah, we've had a long one.
A 2-hour committee meeting. I think we're kind of worn out.
Yeah,
That was
I think we all
There's a lot of information we just absorbed from Matt. Wow.
basically, I was looking for another way to try to help these people with some fences that's got to be torn down and replaced in an easement. Ms. Copeland, did you come up with an alternative that may be palatable?
Her alternative is to adjourn.
No, no pressure at all. I was thinking maybe what we can do, maybe Matt and I can put a memo together for you guys with some options, so we don't have to keep discussing it on the floor.
I think that would be great if we could do that.
Yeah, we'll put something in writing for you.
All right, thank you. But it's nothing top secret, guys. It's something that might happen in the back of some of your constituents' yards one day, especially if we were to get some additional easements. But anyway, with that, unless there's any objection, I'd like to adjourn the meeting by acclamation. All right.